this computer. So this is David Moffat from the Moffcast, and I'm setting out to be the oldest podcaster in the world. Guinness World Book of Records stuff. I got another 25 years to go. I think I'll be 100 in 25 years' time, so perhaps I'll still be doing it then. But I've got a great guest on today. He's a guy that I've crossed swords with a couple of times when I was at the NRL. Although I think on balance, we most likely got on quite well. I understood what his job was and he understood what mine was, I think. And we had two different jobs. Yeah, we'll get onto a little bit of that down the track a bit. But it's welcome to Steve Mascord.
Hey, Dave, how are you, mate? Why don't you stop at 75 and give me an opportunity to catch up? I want to compete. I want to compete and be the oldest podcaster.
No, mate, you do a good job. Because I've been on your podcast. It was about, 18 months, nearly 2 years ago now when I came on and had a little bit of a chat about the NRL. But, mate, I've been doing a bit of research and I'm a little bit confused about who Steve Mascord is. Is Steve Mascord Steve Mascord, or is he somebody else?
What do you mean by that? Well, I'm living in the UK now, so you know, I was working at Sydney Morning Herald when you were at the you were at the NRL.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of run its course, asking 23-year-olds about their hamstrings. And I married an Irish girl, and she wanted to be closer. We met in Sydney, but she wanted to be closer to her family in Tipperary, and I was ready to get out. I couldn't see much of a future in being a rugby league writer in Sydney. You know, Sarah's got a good job, so I jumped at the opportunity to move here to London and start again at the age of 50. And
whereabouts are you living?
We're in Balham, South London. So it's like Clapham, but not as many black Aussies, you know.
But who's Andrew John Langley?
Oh, right. Well, that was I've sort of got a copy of my second book here to plug. But Andrew, the story. If you just let me get up for a second. The story of Andrew John Langley is in this book. Sorry. I should put my headphones on first. The story of Andrew John Langley is in this book. So I was born Andrew John Langley, and I was adopted out at the age of 3 months and dumped in suburban Wollongong. And my life would have been very different if I'd stayed Andrew John Langley, because, you know, it was quite a bohemian family. We had some Queen's honours in the family, you know, a VFL winning captain, doctors. It is actually my grandfather's got a wing named after him in Royal North Shore Hospital. So it's actually the ultimate sliding doors moment to be have been a part of a certain part of Australian society, and actually ending up in a very different part of Australian society. And I guess I questioned my love of rugby league and whether I would have it if I'd stayed in Sydney in a kind of eastern suburbs, well-to-do eastern suburbs family. Who knows?
Yeah, but that's amazing. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, I always knew that you were somewhat obsessed with rock and roll music, as well as your rugby league. And I mean, just on rugby league, I always found you to be an honest journalist. You know, there are some journalists who are not honest, unfortunately, but you know, but there are some. But I think you may remember this, or you may not. You know, I think. There's been some talk about I think this CEO of the Tigers going on holidays, and we were up in the press room, because I always used to like calling into the media room and having a chat with you guys before the game. It was at Parramatta, and I just happened, a throwaway line was that I was going to go on a trip to the Tour de France with my son, who I thought, I just thought, I didn't think anything of it, actually. I was just going on holidays. Well, I know you were one of the guys in the room, and it just took off, mate. Do you remember that?
Well, it actually came up. I was talking to Shane Richardson, the former Cronulla and South CEO, just last night, and he said that with Pascoe going off on holidays now, and also the I believe the Knights CEO is going away as well, that he thought they should dust off all the clippings from that year with you. But I remember kind of being a spectator of that story. I don't remember, because the Telegraph always used to have like the arts department at the Telegraph had this kind of basic template of a postcard, and anyone who left during the season, they just put a different face on the postcard, and I'm sure that they're able to whip those that artwork up in 5 minutes. But I also remember you riding your bike onto the set of the Footy Show, it's sort of gone down in rugby league folklore for those who don't follow rugby league. Dave's trip, the Tour de France trip, is sort of seared in the memory of anyone who not just covered, but anyone who followed the game at the time. But you didn't end up going, did you?
No, I didn't. It became too big a story, and I just didn't want to have myself in the limelight. So, and we've never been to the Tour de France together. But I was going to go to Tour de France with him, then go on a cooking holiday in Italy. And just to this day, I still don't understand, because I had all the blokes at the office that were doing all the jobs. I wasn't that hands-on at that stuff, and I was taking a holiday. But anyway, but the interesting thing is that Malcolm Node was the chairman of the NRL at the time, and he worked for News Limited. And then he ended up at Canterbury, the CEO of the Dogs, and he went on holidays in the middle of the season. And I can always remember coming on a flight. I was sitting next to him on a flight down from Brisbane. I think we'd gone up there for State of Origin or something about that. I can't really remember. And he said to me, "Well, Dave, are you still going to go on holidays?" And I said, and this time I was being stubborn, and I said, "Oh yeah, I don't see why not." But it was so unreal that here's the guy that sort of was sitting there tut-tutting at me for going on holidays, and he did the very same thing. It was really
well. Without, I don't know what your sort of age group of your audience is there, Dave, but I think at one point when Malcolm Node was CEO at Canterbury, a player defecated on his desk. So I'd be wanting to go on holidays too.
Yeah.
If I was in that job.
Mate, oh dear. There are a million stories, mate. There are a million stories. And of course, that's the great thing about rugby league. People want to sanitize rugby league. And for the life of me, I don't understand why, because to sanitize rugby league, you got to sanitize all the supporters. And there's no way you can do that. They thrive on this stuff. They love it. They live for it. And now it's becoming too sanitized, mate. It's it needs to go a bit back to what it was like before. I'm not talking about the behavior of the players, but I'm just talking about, all that stuff that would roll. I mean, the back 8 pages of the telly was rugby league. You couldn't buy that sort of coverage.
Yeah, I guess if you work in the corporate world now, though, you're trying to get government funding, and you're trying to attract a certain type of sponsor, and and then that's why the sort of the attempt to sanitize comes in. And also rugby league is trying. I don't like a lot of things about the current administration. I do like others. They're trying to be socially progressive too. They got behind, same-sex marriage and all that sort of stuff. So, it's just a different world now. And obviously over here, the game, sort of in the UK doesn't have an identity at all. It's just the rugby they play in the north, and the rest of the country don't even think about it. So there are a lot of things that go into that. I don't think you can have, I don't know. I just think the world's moved on. I don't think you can go back
it has.
as you might want to.
Well, yeah, I suppose I might be showing my age, mate. I don't know. But at the end of the day, that was always something that set rugby league apart. I'm not talking about the really bad behaviour of the players, but,
gossip. It was gossip. It's obsessed with gossip. Yeah. And the player transfer thing is amazing, just like running websites and dipping my toe into that. Just putting a name in the same sentence as a club that people don't expect them to be in the same sentence.
Yeah.
That rugby league itself could cease to exist tomorrow. All competitions could spontaneously combust, and you wouldn't get as many hits as Hull KR searching for a new halfback. You know what I mean? It's just, it's. But I know that's professional sport worldwide, isn't it? And we're going off on a tangent here, but I remember writing a story about, someone signing someone in about 1994, and John McDonald, the old rugby league journalist at the Herald, saying to me he thinks it should be left for the clubs to announce signings. I mean, that's how far we've moved in sort of 30 years. That is the absolute lifeblood of sports journalism now, is the transfer speculation. That's a huge percentage of what everyone reads.
Well, as we're seeing with Ponga at the moment, with the Knights, that's it's every day where you see that, and of course people feast on that because should he go? What did Bennett think he was doing going down there to meet with him personally? All that sort of stuff, and of course controversy follows Bennett. Like a bad fly. I mean, he's he was the hardest guy I ever had to deal with when I was at the NRL. Bar none. I didn't like him, he didn't like me. But that's the way it goes, I never held any grudges against him. I just didn't like the guy. Because mainly because I thought he believed, and I think he still does, that the entire rugby league world revolves around him. And to a large extent, I suppose it does, but that wasn't my view. But there are other guys like Sticky, Brian Smith, those sort of guys that I got along really well with.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of alpha personalities in rugby league, and again, I think it's reflected in wider society that people who might be perceived as having bullying tendencies, they find it harder in 2022 than they did in 1998. You know what I mean? For all the bad things that we have in society now, I think there's a bit of an evening up there, and the sort of the bullied have got more of a recourse now, generally in most jobs. And I often think about the Me Too movement and how that might eventually reflect on music, with the whole groupie culture of the 70s and stuff. But everyone, I guess, from the 70s, I'm not sure how many groupies from the 70s really want to come out. Everyone's probably got everyone's probably pushing up daisies now. But yeah, it is interesting, and I've seen that change a lot. In my time from when I first started, where there was a cartel in Sydney running the game, and even someone like Graham Lowe was an outsider, and there there were attempts to push him around when he went to Manly. I remember from my earliest times at the Sydney Morning Herald, there was the old clique at Manly, and the likes of Graham Lowe didn't get on great, and Graham Lowe was standing up to them, and so that clique doesn't exist anymore. To an extent, it's a different thing now. It's an alliance between the people. It's an alliance between the people running the NRL and their rights holders, and their rights holders now own newspapers, and the media has contracted, which goes back to what you asked me earlier about why I left. The media's contracted now, so there's fewer checks and balances. If you've got the sort of the rights holders are also the ones commenting on your performance, so those relationships are open to be exploited.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might have said on your podcast that I came on, I woke up one day and I said to myself, if I had a choice, would I work for News Limited? And the answer to that was clearly a no. And so then I went in and I resigned because, I didn't want to work for them. I just thought they were a very ordinary organization. They would belt the crap out of the game in their newspapers, which they owned 50% of. And I could never come to terms with that. I didn't expect them to give everybody a free ride, but, basically everybody was fair game other than the players. And I spoke to Ricky Stewart the other day, and I said to him, how did he get on with the media? Because he's still a character, right? When you see Ricky Stewart and when you see a couple of other coaches, what they're thinking, right? They don't, they wear their heart on their sleeve. and you know, I mean, he said that he's tried to temper it a bit, and you know, and I was a bit sad when I heard him say that, because that means that they're getting to him. We want to know what these coaches are thinking, yeah. But you, I mean, I say to you,
there's two different issues there, Dave. Like I actually, my idealistic kind of fantasy land, I'd like to think that my boss's ownership of whatever their business interests were would have no impact at all on my reporting, and I would applaud the fact that they don't feel, you know, reluctant to get stuck into an administrator just because their boss is doing business with them. Unfortunately, what happens is you've got a bit of double think. So
yeah,
when it suits you, you claim editorial independence, and then I think at times there does appear to be examples of throwing grenades for your boss. You know, so it's either one or the other. I never thought it was my job to sell newspapers. I thought it was my boss's job to make money out of my work, and my work was done according to my training and a code of ethics. So
yeah.
I never thought it was my job to sell papers. I didn't think I consider journalism, and people laugh at me, and you can laugh at me, but I think journalism is not like medicine in any other way, except that it's not your job to make money. You know what I mean? It's your job to provide a public service, and it's the job of other people to find the person who owns a hospital or the surgery to make money out of your work. Your job is to actually fix sick people, and in journalism, your job is to report on things, and hopefully the people above can make money out of your work. We now have a situation where journalists are having their hits count, you know, their clicks counted individually, and their performance measured on clicks, which is not conducive to them doing journalism. You know, so again, these are all things that made it a very easy decision for me to leave. You know, when I got here, I didn't want anything to do with journalism at all. I've now sort of come back to it to the point where I think about it enough to say the stuff I've just said. So
Yeah, sure.
You know, I've had a bit of time away from it, and I think about it as deeply as I ever have now, and I practice. I write every day again now, but I don't really want to go back to a newsroom.
So let me ask you this question, mate, and that is, to what extent then do you think a journalist and his bosses should have a duty of care? Because duty of care has become this real catch-all thing, right? You know, and in the workplace, you've got to have a duty of care for your employees. To what extent do you think that there should be a duty of care when it comes to, you know, hounding a coach out of his job? Or I've never worried about criticism, so I didn't mind the criticism that came my way. But hounding, you know, an administrator out of his job.
It's a tough question, because I actually come down, and Ben Eichen was criticised for this, but I'm on his side, and I don't care what anyone says. I'll whatever it says about me, I'll wear. But I think there are certain types of people who shouldn't get involved in public-facing work, because, you know, they might have a mental fragility to scrutiny and to publicity, and you know, so I agree with Ben on that, and I think it is a public-facing job, and if you're a player, don't delude yourself that you're being paid to play. You actually your entire wage is paid by pay television rights. You're being paid to be a public figure. If you just want to play rugby league, go and play in the park and have fun with your mates. So, but having said that, I don't think I've ever called for a coach to be sacked, and I'm 53, because I don't know what happens in the room. You know, I may have gone as far as to say a coach is under pressure. The closest I thought that a coach's position was untenable was a really good guy, a guy I really liked, but I thought David Kidwell at the last Rugby League World Cup for New Zealand to not make the semi-finals, I thought that was one of the great examples of a coach's position becoming untenable according to the generally accepted norms of such appointments. So you might say a coach is under pressure because they're a big club. You know, over here you look this year at Leeds and Warrington, who spend a lot of money on players, big rich clubs, and they're underperforming. So I would say, according to the history of those clubs and the expectations people have of them, the coach would be under pressure. And I think that's a fair thing to say. But I don't, I think you've got to sort of, back things up with facts and figures and precedent and history. And I think your job as a reporter is to give things context. So in the court, in terms of a match coverage or a panel conversation, you're the one who's supposed to say, this is how it happened before. This is what that means. You're supposed to interpret what someone says, the implications of what they say. That's your job. I think the ex-players are better at talking about tactics and stuff like that. So, and the presenters are probably better at talking down the barrel of the camera than you are as well. So everyone's got their role. So I think there is I don't know. I'm more about internalizing, because I think mental health now gets brought up a lot in terms of any time anyone says something unkind about someone else. They say, what about his or her mental health? And I think when your job is as a kind of policeman, I always say you're the referee for the rest of the week. The referee's got everyone for 80 minutes, and the journalist's got them for the rest of the week. You are going to be in a position where you're quoting someone saying unkind, or if you're writing an opinion piece, you're saying something unkind, and that can impinge on people's mental health. No one likes criticism, and some people aren't suited to be entertainers or TV hosts or actors or professional athletes, because they're sensitive and they're susceptible to depression or whatever. And I think people have a duty of care over themselves as well.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I think I mean, if I look around the world in rugby and in rugby league, there are a lot of people in the roles that I had that are terribly thin-skinned. They just cannot tolerate any sort of criticism. You see that with the New Zealand Rugby Union, with the Welsh Rugby Union, and organisations such as that. The merest hint of criticism, and all hell breaks loose with the media. And I always quite enjoyed the criticism, because I enjoyed the back and forth. I enjoyed a little bit of the repartee, and I made a decision very early on in the piece that if I was going to be doing media, then I should enjoy it, and I did. I really did enjoy it. I enjoy doing this sort of stuff as well, and not for no other reason that perhaps people watching this and listening to you may not have ever heard this side of you. They might have in your podcast, I don't know, but and this is what I try to get to, is the real person behind their public persona. And I
think sports administrators now, though, they hide themselves behind a wall of PR, and I know David Gallup, and I think yourself, that you'd set aside time, but maybe between 5 and 6, to return calls every day, and they don't return calls now. They don't speak direct. I'm guessing Peter V'landys obviously has a good relationship with reporters at the two main mastheads, who are also his rights holders. Very good relationship, in fact. But generally speaking, when Robert Elston was over here at Super League, he didn't talk directly to the media. He didn't return calls every day. And I've got to say, the media over here probably didn't put in a call to him every day. So because it's just a different relationship. It's in the English, British idea is a bit more reserved and less personable and direct than the Antipodean way of dealing with things. But sports administration generally has become very corporate, and they will get a PR person to ring back. And I really despise the off the record briefing. So you'll get someone ring you who can't be quoted. So there's a major issue in a sport, and there is actually no one from the organisation running that sport who will be quoted on that major issue. But they'll give you an off the record briefing, and basically it can be used to test the water. They'll give a view. You'll write a story saying it's understood the league believe this or will do that. And if the response is bad, they can deny having ever spoken to you and change their policy. And to me, that's gutless. I won't do it. I had my last days as a columnist at Sydney Morning Herald, had a thing where a guy from the NRL, who's a friend of mine who was working in media, rang and said, that thing in your column's wrong. And I said, I want you to be quoted saying what's right. He said, I'm not going to be quoted. And I said, well, you should care more about a falsity about the NRL getting into the public domain than I do. So if you don't care, I'm not changing it. And that was, and I find also the people who work in media care more about their own reputations and their own future job prospects than getting the message across to not talking about that fella particularly, but just generally.
Yeah.
They're more concerned when they personally get criticised than when their organisation gets criticised. And I think all these things get fixed if people are willing to front up and be quoted on the record.
Yeah. So in respect of the rugby league scene in the UK, obviously it is played in basically two northern counties, Yorkshire.
Very big in Cumbria, but they don't have a team in Super League. They don't have a team in Super League.
No.
Cumbria is quite a strong county too.
Strong county, yeah. But they also have some teams with presence down in London. I mean, the London Broncos, they've fallen on hard times, and I know that from something that you put up on LinkedIn the other day, that you've got a bit of a soft spot for a club which is called the Scholars or Scholars.
The Scholars, yeah, Scholars. It's actually, you asked what it's named after. It's actually named after the pub that was up the street. It was the Scholar, Skolar. So it's not. They're not pretending to be terribly smart.
No.
It's really pretending to be good at schooling. But I always went to Broncos and Scholars, since I got here, and I imagined a kind of semi-retirement where I, stood next to the pitch with a beer in my hand every Saturday or Sunday. If one was home, one was away on alternate weeks, if they were that well organised, and just watched, But a couple of about 4 weeks ago, maybe I was asked would I be interested in being on the board of Scholars, and I mean I've always been, I've made it clear since I moved here that I was keen to get involved in on your side of the fence, Dave. It's actually very hard to break into.
Yeah.
I did some people just see you as, you're a journalist, and plus they kind of see you as a bit of a loose cannon.
Yeah.
You go through these kind of, I've been through this kind of arc where I actually at first started to shut up and not give my opinion on social media because I thought it might help me, being able to make a difference behind the scenes, but I didn't really get anywhere. And I didn't sell my soul, but I put it in the front window and I offered it for sale, and no one bought it. So I've gone back on that. I think what people expect from me is to be first and foremost a journalist, a commentator, and if I sacrifice that, I got nothing. But nonetheless, I trying to help the nines as well. As we've spoken before. I put up a story last night about the New Zealand under 16s and under 18s District Nines champions. Which was awarded over Easter. There's absolutely nothing in that for me at all. Nothing. I pay to host the website. I run the socials, and it's just to give nines to get it in people's minds that nines is a thing, like sevens is in rugby union, and to get it in people's minds that it's a leverageable product, and that there's there's a tournament in Naples in Florida at the end of the month, and there's a tournament here in London in July, and it exists, and it's a thing that can be sold and leveraged by rugby league, and so I do that in my spare time, hoping that maybe it will have some impact on people's perceptions, and that long after I'm gone, nines might realise its potential. So, as I said, a long way around. I got asked to be involved with Scholars. One of the first things they mentioned was being a go-between between the coach and the board, and I didn't think that really would have a. That's not my go, mate. I've watched footy my whole life, but I probably didn't take much in all the games I've watched. I couldn't help a coach in any way, shape, or form. So, but I've started to try to do their social, do stuff with their social media and their website, make sure they post more. Do score updates on the weekend, which teams at that level will often just retweet the opposition for scores. You won't, even the London Broncos, who are, they played in the World Club Challenge, beat the Canberra Raiders. They won't tweet from their away games. So So just trying to sort of improve those sort of things.
Yeah.
This Saturday playing Rochdale, and I said that it would be really good to engage. They're very good at engaging the corporate community. They have an event once a year at the Honourable Artillery Company, which is right in the middle of like near Shoreditch, right in the middle of the city. It's apparently the second most expensive real estate on which a sports ground is, well, a rugby ground is placed in the world, outside of the one place in Japan, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they play there every year, and they invite all the corporates, all the stockbrokers and stuff of the city down, and it sort of pays for the club to run for almost the whole year. So, but I think one area where they can improve is that they can engage the expat community more. So we're doing, one of the ideas for Saturday is to do a little remembrance ceremony, because it's around Anzac weekend. The local member of parliament is a Kiwi. You know, I've been going to functions at the High Commission recently. So, and you know, I think it's honouring, you know, a tradition and showing respect to that part of the community. I think if the two teams line up for the minute silence on Saturday, there will be more than half a dozen Aussies and Kiwis across the two teams.
Yeah.
So I think it just makes sense to do that. So they're little things that, you know, I think you surrender the right to criticise if you're given the opportunity yourself and you don't do it. You know what I mean? Like, I can't say rugby league in London should do X, Y, and Z. And then someone asks me to join the board of a London Rugby League club, and I say no, and I go back to my typewriter and keep bagging them. I just don't think that's honourable, you know. So you've got to do your best.
The three most important people in a club, and for it to work properly, the chairman, the chief executive, and the coach. And the coach, and like if the board want to get a conduit between the players and the coach and themselves, it should be the chief executive. Now, I don't know whether you guys have a chief executive, but if that triumvirate isn't working like, you know, a well-oiled machine, then that's where you may have some problems, because, you know, there's all sorts of things, the pressures of winning, especially a team like Scholars, which, you know, you guys are struggling a little bit at the moment. And, you know, you're playing Rochdale. I know that Doncaster is in and I was born in Doncaster. So I've always been quite interested to see where they are. But, you know, they're down there with the Rochdales of this world. And, you know,
I've got a rock and roll story about Doncaster. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I went to see Jane's Addiction. If you remember Jane's Addiction, they were an alternative band from the early 90s. Perry Farrell started Lollapalooza Festival, and I went to see them in Doncaster, and Perry Farrell said, "Is this a college town?" And the guy down the front, who you could hear over the microphone, went, "No, it's a fucking shithole." He said, "Don't forget to get some merch on the way out." And the same guy went, "Fucking 20 quid."
That is me, a Yorkshireman. And if he's talking about Doncaster, he's most likely right. But they do have a decent horse race there called the St. Leger. And you know, my granddad was a businessman up there, and I always say that that's where I got my business acumen was from my grandfather. He was a real character. He was a tic-tac man at the race courses. You know what I mean by a tic-tac man? Guys that set the odds with their, you know, hands going everywhere. You know, really quite an interesting guy. So, yeah.
The CEO at Doncaster is Carl Hall, who Kiwi listeners and viewers might know. He played for the Knights, Newcastle Knights, and he played for New Zealand. I seem to remember him being involved in a tour story back in the day, but I'm not going to repeat it in case it wasn't him, and it could have been someone else. But yeah, he's a good character, and he's been a good servant of the British game. And I remember him saying on a podcast much like this, he said when Toronto Wolfpack came in, he said, be careful what you wish for, because they're going to get bigger than us very quickly, and they'll dwarf us, you know. So maybe we don't want them in the competition because they might be too good and too big. And of course, COVID took care of that and a few other things. But yeah, he's a good guy, Carl Hall. There's another Kiwi connection to Doncaster. So there you go.
Well, there you go. But I suppose my reach at the moment goes into the UK, America, because I'm doing American podcasts as well on American rugby, and Australia and New Zealand, and what have you. But I'm enjoying it. But when I was doing a bit of research, it came up before you were a journalist. It said you were an author. Right, so you have been either, I don't know if you think you've been relegated to an author or if you've been promoted to an author, but you might like to have a bit of a chat about a couple of books that you've written.
Yeah, well, obviously I sort of foreshadowed that by showing you them both earlier, but no, that I would want to be described as an author now because I'm trying to flog a book. So but I did a book. I was back in Australia in end of 2019, and on New Year's Day 2020, I went to visit Ken Alfredson as one of 100 interviewees for my book Two Tribes, which is about the 1997 season, and it actually came up. Well, it brings together a few things we've discussed already. I was at the first Toronto Wolfpack friendly in like 2000 and would that have been 2017. It was in Brickhouse, and Nigel Wood said, who was the CEO of the RFL and CEO of International Federation, and also I think himself would say was one of those administrators who's very sensitive to criticism. David, he would admit that. Yes. I think he said you should do a sequel to Mike Coleman's book Super League: The Inside Story, which is also up there, but I won't go get it. And which is about the Super League war and the climbing through windows and signing players, blah blah blah. It finishes in 1996. Before the actual Super League year. So, and I didn't want to do it, but then I went, well, actually, I'm not gainfully employed really at the moment. I should accept. So I set about, I did 100 interviews, and I included some quotes from our podcast chat as well. Although you came along, it finishes on December 19, 1997. So it's about the months from Super League being given the go-ahead, October 4, 1996. To December 1997. And because Mike Coleman was writing at the time, he actually was able to write what was on people's sandwiches, what the colours of the drapes were. I'm not one of those super rememberers. So I went back and interviewed 100 people, including just about everyone you could think of: Rebo, Arpison, Quayle, Lindsay, along with the Knights ball boy, along with Liz Steet, who was worked as a physio at the Roosters in New South Wales that year. The end was Paul Harrigan, and I think it was. I said it was like sort of interviewing Luke Skywalker and him being able to explain the entire meaning of Star Wars, because he was not only the star of the story, Paul Harrigan, but he's also the fellow who had the best insight into what it was all about. And he made reference to working class people of the north of England settling in the Hunter region in the late 1900s, and how they knew instinctively what the war was about because their ancestors had been through it once, which is for a retired footballer to offer that sort of insight. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it now. But I mean, just
to cut in there for a minute, I was on the other side of the coin, because when Super League hit in rugby, I was running New South Wales Rugby at the time, and we were really concerned that Super League was going to come because they needed players, that they were going to come and raid all the rugby union players. But we were also coming under a lot of pressure at that time to pay our players, and we would do various ways of getting them some money, expenses and what have you. And that wasn't going to last much longer. So whilst all that was going on, I was one of 4 people that went off and did the big deal with Murdoch, which for Super Rugby, which saw rugby go professional, and it was as a direct result of the Super League war that we actually ended up with a professional game of rugby.
Yeah, I call it, except in France where they've been paying them all along. But I call it rugby's second great schism. And I had to be a bit narrow in my. Well, Nigel wanted me to do a sequel to a book about 14 months. He wanted to cover 25 years. And so I'm like, he wanted to bring right up to date. And I'm like, well, that's not going to have any character in it. It's not going to have any humor or stories. It's just going to be a list of events, you know. So I think he still wants me to do that. But I mean, there were some amazing stories, and the things I remembered at the time. I mean, I remember Brett Mullins being beaten up in his own bed at the the day after the very last time an Australian team wore the Super League logo, and we knew about it the next day. I was covering the tour, and it was never written about. It was written about in the assailant's biography, and he was never named. And so I spent the whole book thinking this story has to be in there, but will Brett Mullins talk to me? So I got Brett Mullins was like the 99th person I got, and I'm not going to tell you what he said, but you have to read the book. But there were so many other stories. I mean, there's a great, famous judiciary hearing of Mark Geyer for eye gouging, where Chris Murphy represented him and said, "This is a court of law. This is Murdoch's court. I'm going back to the ARL," and he walked out and stuff like that. I interviewed Cole Bentley, who was on the judiciary that night, and he actually said that he voted not guilty to Geyer. And I'll give away this, but at the end of the chapter, at the end of the chapter, I said to him, "Well, what do you think actually happened?" And he said, he paused. He said, "I think it was an eye gouge gone wrong."
It's amazing.
Like there's a dozen stories like that were never written at the time that you don't know about. And I found, Dave, that I was looking for people. I'm like, have you got a number for this guy? Where does that guy live now? Blah 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 blah. Then I'd find that they were my Facebook friend. Because I lived through it, and I knew most of the people as people. I interviewed Jeffrey Cousins and from Optus, the corporate eco warrior, and I don't know Jeffrey Cousins. I interviewed Rodney Overby, the American ground announcer out at Penrith that year, and I don't know Rodney Overby, and I don't know the Knights ball boy, but everyone else, literally everyone else, I interviewed, I know as a person. I know their characteristics. I know what sort of, there was small talk when I spoke to them, like we're sort of talking now. So it was a really good experience, especially for someone who lives on the other side of the world, to reconnect with 98 people that I maybe haven't spoken to in 25 years.
I do know Jeffrey Cousins. Well, I did know Jeffrey Cousins at the time because Optus claimed that we had agreed to sell them the rights to this new professional competition, and it went to court and Optus lost. Yes, it was so there were all these things going along in parallel, and the same people involved, and it was very, very interesting. And of course there was for rugby union, there was Packer in the background as well, and Ross Turnbull. And Ross Turnbull had got all the players signed but didn't have any money. And I think that Packer was actually using this potential world rugby circus that they'd come up with as a way of, just getting under Rupert's skin. Because he never had any intention of putting big amounts of money, this is Kerry Packer, into it. But I met him when I was CEO of the NRL, and he gave me a really good bit of advice, or two good bits of advice actually. He said, "Son," because he don't call everybody son, he said, "Son, never pick a fight with an organisation that buys printing ink by the tanker load."
That was John Hardigan's favourite.
Was it?
John Hardigan's favourite saying was never pick a fight with an organisation that buys a print, newsprint by the ton, was the actual way he would say it.
Yeah. And the other was, he said once again, "Son, the soft option is always the wrong option." And I've never forgotten about that, because I think there's a lot of truth to it. So mate, talking about your books, where can people get them? Give us a look at them.
Okay, well, they're both available on stevemascord.com and shop.stevemascord.com, but they're also available on the normal places like Amazon and stuff. But I'm going to give I'm going to make the discount code Dave from Hornsby. You'll have to explain that, but I'm going to make the discount. So at stevemascord.com and it's /product/2 tribes. That should be easy to remember.
Yeah.
Or in the Northern Hemisphere, shop.stevemascord.com/product/2 tribes. And you use the discount code Dave from Hornsby at checkout, and you'll get $2.50 off the book in Aussie dollars, or £199 off the book in UK sterling.
Okay, so
you want to tell everyone Dave from Hornsby?
Yeah, Dave from Hornsby. I was accused by the media of ringing up talkback shows as Dave from Hornsby, and I think that's the way the story went, wasn't it? Or have you got a different?
No, but that doesn't answer the question. Did you ring?
No, I didn't.
You never did.
No, never. I never ever rang anybody claiming to be Dave from Hornsby. And but that's just one of those myths, mate. I'm happy for it to be out there. It's a little bit like the cycling advertisement that I did for Fox Sports, leading into, as you alluded to, leading into the Tour de France, and I had this thing, the idiot box in front of me, and I had to say all these words. Well, I came out and said, "Hello, my name is David Moffat, and I was going to the Tour de France," and they used it. So,
isn't that great for people overseas? That's how big rugby league is in Australia. That the CEO of the NRL would be used in an ad to promote television coverage of the of the Tour de France, because it was part of a sort of soap opera news story that was back page for days and days.
Yes,
that's something that rugby league. I don't think rugby league will achieve that level of cut through anywhere else in the world ever.
No, perhaps not. But mate, I tell you what, it's been fantastic talking to you. For people watching and listening, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because the more subscriptions, you don't have to pay for them. I mean, it's all free stuff. Just hit the subscribe button, follow me, or whatever, because that. And
I might get you to put a link to our chat as well in your.
I'm going to send you. I'll send you the copy of it so that you can spread it far and wide. You've got many more people on your social media than I do. It didn't
cost me that much either, really.
No. And you did this one for
unlike Tony Adams. Hello, Tony Adams. No, mate.
Oh, mate, it's been fantastic. And the one thing we will do is catch up next time I'm in London. I'm not quite sure when that's going to be, but we should do it. And perhaps I'll come along to the Scholars and see if there's any.
Maybe we go and see a Welsh rock band.
Well, perhaps there's a few of those, aren't there? Perhaps we can do.
Stereophonics are very big, aren't they?
Yeah. Mate, fantastic. Great to see you.
I'm going to write a story about you having a podcast because you're going to need all the help you can get bagging organisations that buy their newsprint by the ton. So you're going to need people to help you promote your podcast. Okay.
Good on you, mate. Speak to you soon, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye.